Hi. So, this is technically live. I'm just going to get right into it, and whoever joins us will join us. I am going to be putting all of these lives, they're already in my IG, but I put them into a series that I'm now calling NRK, Naada Drops Knowledge. That's the title of the new series that all these lives will be stored in on my IGTV. And they're really, let's be honest, as I kick my tripod, they're really just me sitting here and engaging in conversations with you guys about things that I think are truly important, and to get the conversation going, not only within myself, because obviously I take time to think about these things before I sit here and present them to all of you, but also for all of us to start thinking about these things and things that I feel are very important for us to be contemplating. So today we're going to be talking about death. We're going to talk about death because I think it's such an important thing to contemplate. And those of us who move through life and actually have taken time to think about death in the relationship to life, from my studies, have a bit easier time when that moment comes, which the truth is none of us really know when we're going to die. And most of us are not living in that way. So this conversation came up actually a few years ago, maybe almost 2 years ago, with a dear friend of mine, Katie, who went through a program called Doorway into Light, which is based on teachings from Ram Dass, and there are other people involved in that organization. She did a program becoming a death doula. And we were talking about how, so many people live their lives. We tend to be, of course, this is not in all cultures, but in many cultures, and at least I can speak to here in America and how I grew up, there's not a lot of conversation or relationship to death, even how we speak to our kids about that. We just had Easter, and we have this concept of resurrection, and even in that concept has a lot to do. First, you die to be resurrected. So death, is not only like the ultimate death of us losing our body, and of course, based on what you believe, there's many different theories on what happens to us after death. So of course that means there are different cultures and different religions and different spiritual paths that teach a different way of how to prepare for death. But one thing that is for sure is when we start to live our lives on a day-to-day basis, recognizing and being in an intimate relationship with death and understanding and living our life that way, we actually end up having a much more fulfilling life. And what does that look like? That looks like doing the things to have a life of completion. So many people when they're in that, when you look at the statistics of people who are in their last days before they transition, there might be thoughts of, if only I had, I wish I had spoken to this person. Or sometimes that happens not even when we're dying, right? It might not be the person who's actually dying thinking of all the things they wish they had done or who they wish they had spoken to, but that can also happen in losing someone who's really close to us and thinking, if only I had sent them that letter, if only I had had that call before they died. So when we day to day really take time to look and complete things, we don't end up with that longing feeling whenever our day will actually come, or if somebody else that we care about or who's a big part of our life transitions expectedly, or unexpectedly. And what does that look like, right? That looks like really, taking time to see, like, are there people I wish I had reached out to? Are there conflicts in my life that I want to resolve now? And of course, we do not have the power for any, if it involves another person, right, for them to necessarily want to complete with us, but we can complete for ourselves. I really like to think about this and approach this idea of death, from my background and what I believe and how I relate to myself in life is as a consciousness. I don't think that I am only my body. And at the moment of death, we shed our bodies and our consciousness continues on. That is, so I'm operating this conversation from my perspective, though I may not know exactly what that consciousness is and what that form is outside of the body. Those of us who've done astral projection or had what might be termed spiritual experiences within our consciousness realm that is so much beyond the body, that's how I would assume my experience of when I do transition from this body might be. But, we don't really know. What I do know, though, is that there's many times in life that we have the opportunity to practice transitioning. And I've learned a lot from listening to elders and other people who have studied through different cultures. So many cultures have very specific traditions of how to care for the body, how to care for consciousness, what to expect and what you will experience as a consciousness. For example, the Tibetan book of Living and Dying, or the Egyptian book of Living and Dying. Also, I read from Awakening Osiris, which is also a book about that living and dying based in Egyptian theology. When we go to sleep every night, we transition consciousness. So here's a great place for us to be in practice of that experience of transitioning consciousness, is every night when we go to sleep. If we were not to wake up, what would we feel good about? What would we not feel good about? What would we wish we had said? What would we wish we had done? And when we operate from that place on a mini cycle every day, we can become really clear about what are the things that are most fulfilling to us here. I've been listening a lot also to Sadhguru, whose teachings I love and I cannot recommend enough. And he continuously comes back to how short our time is here. Our time is short here. And he also continues to allude to, in so many ancient traditions and the Vedic traditions that he comes from, there's so much potential available to us as humans. And we have such a short time here to really learn it. And he always asks, well, have you read the user's manual? So, what would your life look like if you were at this moment here, as you're watching this video, to realize you're going to die? And that could be tomorrow. And how would that change your relationship to how you live? One beautiful human being, actually, his name's Kadara. I'm going to be doing an interview with him tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific time. I was chatting with him and he says, every day that I wake up, I just wake up going, I'm alive. I'm so happy to be alive. Great. I have another day. How many of us do that? How many of us truly awaken each day, open our eyes, and give gratitude that we're alive? We take our lives for granted, and as a result, patterns of commiserating and complaining and all depression and misery and all these things that we're dealing with as a society and a culture in this country, in America, and in the world, a lot of those actually start to shift when we do have a more intimate relationship with our death. Also, one of the things that I'm really passionate about and I talk about is coming back into the cycles of harmony. When we look at the different challenges that we get to solve, and we look at the origins of where some of those problems have come from, they do come, many of them from an avoidance of recognizing death as part of the intimate cycle of how nature works. That there is a give and a take. Anytime that we consume or eat something, whether it's a plant or an animal, something has given its conscious life and its experience over to us, and in a way is gifting us that life force so that we can create with it. And when we start to really show up and recognize that we've been gifted this life and come from that perspective of such deep gratitude. I see so many posts on Facebook and Instagram, and there's so many gratitude groups nowadays. I'm grateful for this and I'm grateful for that. But to truly start at the core of, I'm grateful for my life, because without the life, every other gratitude on that list would not be possible. And I'm starting to bring that more and more of that practice into my life. So I start, as I'm conversing with us today, as we're conversing, as I'm talking to you through this camera. What is death for you? And how often do you think about it? for me, and what's going on in my life at this moment, I've been chatting with my mom a lot. And because I've been thinking about death over the last week or two, it's part of a conversation with a friend that inspired me to theme today's talk about death. I decided to call my mother and to ask her very clearly, like, I know you have legal papers saying whether if anything ever happens to you, if you were to have a stroke or a heart attack, whether you want to be kept on life support, but I want to talk to you about it. I want to have a deep, intimate conversation with you about how you feel about your life and how long you want to be alive, and do you want to stay alive if you need assistance, if something is to happen to you, so that I could have that conversation with the people, not just my mother because she's older, but also my sister and the people who I may be put in the position of making very big decisions. And also seeing how people who did not have those discussions with the ones that they care about, seeing the experience that they have gone through when they had to unexpectedly be put in making some of those decisions. So that's number one. You know, if you feel up to it and you're ready to really just move into a deeper, fuller relationship with life through creating a deeper and fuller relationship with death, have those conversations with people now, you know, and we always do here and there. It's here when we talk about death, usually it's tell people that you love them as if you may not ever see them again, which is obviously a great way to live life, because you're ideally being truthful and honest and caring and loving and appreciative of who's there in that moment in front of you and who maybe you haven't seen in a long time and you might want to just simply reach out and give love to. So take a moment, because breathing is important. Let's all take a moment and take a deep breath in. And even as we inspire, feeling life fill our body. And as we exhale, letting that life force leave us. And I invite you to, as you continue to breathe, just check in and recognize that even in this moment, there are trillions of cells coming to life and dying within you. That nothing is really ever truly the same. Life itself is a continuous motion, a continuous relationship between living and dying. On the physical realm, on the mental realm, on the emotional realm, on the energetic realm, on the spiritual realms. A lot of times we talk about ego death. And from that ego death, being able to move into a more transcendent consciousness, beyond separation, beyond personality and understanding. This is what all the sages and the wise ones speak of, right? That we die to a relationship within ourselves in order to be born into a more expansive awareness of what is a more, according to them, a real reality, the unification of all that is. And so when we start to be intimately comfortable with death, it's easier to let go of things. Whether that's a relationship that we know no longer serves us, whether that meaning a relationship with a person, it could be a relationship to food, sugar, caffeine, alcohol, and truly letting go of whatever part of yourself maybe has a tendency towards any of those things. It could be letting go of certain patterns in our life, letting go of a job or a career, so that it can truly we put it to rest, so that we can truly step into a new version of ourselves. So these are all ways that life and death interplay continuously in our lives. Yet, when it comes to a young child, and this was the discussion I was having actually that inspired me to talk about this today. How do we talk to our kids about death? Like how awkward do a lot of adults get, right? Maybe someone's died, a grandparent has passed away unexpectedly, and then how much have we anchored a comfort in that relationship to death within our own being, so that we can then pass that on to the young ones, right? Or do we get weird and we don't want to say grandma died or the dog died, and so we make up a story to try to make it comfortable for them? In many ways, that's, really not serving them to understand the truth of what this existence here is in a human form on this planet. So when we can say, hey, yes, you have a body. You have this body for a certain period of time on this planet, and we don't all know, how long that's going to be. What would that look like to have that conversation with our children? Perhaps that would allow them to have a greater, if we were to start having that conversation at a younger age, that would allow them from a younger age to have a greater appreciation for this gift that they have been given, that we've all been given, of life. So, I've been contemplating death, especially having been in Egypt. We did a rebirth, right? So it was called self-initiation. We started at an Osirian temple. For those of you who don't know the story of Isis and Osiris, Osiris dies. He was chopped into 13 pieces. Isis, this is very summed up, by the way, brings all those pieces back together, brings him back to life for a little bit. They're able actually to conceive a child, and then he ends up dying again, and becomes really one of the netter of the underworld. And we see that also with Jesus. Jesus dies and then he's resurrected. So there's actually a lot of spiritual wisdom that we can gain from looking at these stories and looking at this relationship to death. You can say metaphorically that's the death of the ego before they transcend into their more enlightened state. Maybe you might even say, depending how deep you go down the esoteric and magical worlds, that when we become that intimately versed with life, there is the ability to actually leave our body and come back into our body. There's a lot of stories about that stuff. More, I've been exposed to it more through the Indian and Vedic tales of what has been possible. But what does that even look like, right? For the idea of someone that could literally die and then actually be brought back to life. It's pretty fascinating to think about. But either way, we still have this pattern of ebb and flow, give and take, life and death. And when we truly understand these and we're not in avoidance of them, I literally promise you and guarantee you that your experience just becomes more vast and more full. And what also happens is that when we truly are at peace with our death, a layer of anxiety and fear leaves you. It just leaves you. I know for myself, I can literally say that I'm so happy with my life that if I was to die tomorrow, I would be okay. I don't have anxiety around that. I think that's also because I don't identify or have a story that that's the end with death. I feel like for me, part of what perpetuates my spiritual practice is a understanding, is how I understand and choose to understand things at this time, that there is a consciousness that will transcend and go somewhere else. So understanding that even inspires me to learn things like I mentioned earlier, astral travel. What is it like to separate my astral or energetic body from my physical body now and bring it back? Will that give me a more conscious experience if I'm practicing those things now when I pass from my body, and how I will actually leave my body at the time when I am not here, right? If I get to be in a conscious enough place, when I go through that transition, hopefully. So I'm just curious. Let's see how many of you are on here. Oh, there's some different. Thank you guys for being patient while I read. We also are talking about grieving in here. I think grieving is an acceptance. Yes. Thank you while I read these. All right. Yeah. Someone on here was saying that acceptance and grieving is a whole nother one, right? Like, do we truly allow ourselves to grieve and grief? But I'm going to put that aside and maybe talk about that in a future video. Because obviously grieving is something that is very real, that happens with letting go of anything that we've had attachment to, or losing a dear one, who's been a part of our life. Especially if it's in a couple, experience where you've maybe lived with someone day in and day out for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that I can't even imagine what that experience of dramatic change is for people who survive in long-term relationships. So, but that long-term relationship can also be in our own life, maybe not to a person, but towards a pattern of being or something that we've used to cope or deal with. When we talk about ego death, actually, this is very interesting to me. One of the things in ego death that gets spoken about a lot is that we as humans, we also, this kind of goes into the discussion of thriving and surviving, that we're actually hardwired to avoid death. And that hardwiring in our nervous system is part of what makes it so difficult to transition out of behavioral patterns that may not actually be life-threatening, but are experienced by our ego, which combined with the way our nervous system is designed, literally moves us towards perseverance. And when you're persevering, you're in some ways basically in a survival mode, that the main core job of the body and the ego is to make sure that you stay alive. And part of that on a how would I say this, on a subtler level, is the ego staying alive, the concept of the personality being like, that's why we get embarrassed, right? Because somehow, or have fear around something, because we have this identity of me, that looks bad on me, or I'm not going to be okay if I do that. That would be the fear, right? The embarrassment would be like, so many things we don't even realize are unconsciously causing us to make choices in our life simply based on the fact that we're attempting to persevere and keep alive an identity or a personality or a vision of how we think we're viewed in the world. So this is another way that we can apply the concept of death to how we show up in the world. And when we get into a practice of dying, and one's coming through right now that I'm going to share, and we're totally okay with that on a physical level, on a mental level, on an emotional level, and on energetic levels, we have much more liberation. We are able to create on a much more vast scale. So the idea that was coming to me, sort of moving through as I was just chatting, was what would it be like at the end of each day to truly actually allow yourself consciously to die, to put each thing to rest? To look at your activities for the day and to complete with them internally if anything came up for you emotionally, or if you're looping in your mind, again, around embarrassment sometimes, what did I say? I could have done something different. To go through your day and literally put it all to rest, allow it to die. And also with death, I get the vision of putting it into the soil, burying it in the ground and allowing it to compost so that we can then truly absorb the nutrients of those experiences and integrate them into our being so that we can be more empowered and wiser when and if another similar situation may turn up like that again. So that's the practice that I'm going to invite us into, and I will begin, since it just came through, to do myself, and it'll be interesting to check in next week when we do the live. I'll do a little bit about what my experience was doing this coming week, of each night closing my eyes, sitting in a position before I lay down, and truly letting any physical things just be dead, put them to rest in my body, make complete peace with them. Any mental things, anything I'm thinking about what I haven't achieved yet, or where I'm not good enough, or where I haven't met my own expectations, or think I've met somebody else's expectations, putting those to rest, letting myself be at peace with those things, or emotionally noticing and scanning my body for anywhere that I feel any sensations or emotions around, grief or sadness, something for that day, or happiness or excitement, nervousness, all the natural things that one might feel on an emotional level. And then again, being at peace with them and putting them to sleep, and truly going to sleep each night in completion, that if you were not to awake, that you would be at peace. And doing this practice on a regular basis is simply giving us the chops, like developing the skills for what will inevitably come. The day that you will be leaving your body, because it happens and it will happen. And the more prepared we are by making it a daily practice, by being aware of death and being okay talking about death and not shunning it or shaming it or avoiding it, the more we're going to be living fulfilled lives where we're actually integrating the fullness of the life experience and honoring the true cycles of nature and harmony. And I truly believe, and why I'm talking about this is because those of us who do that are really being called forth into leadership at this time. Those who are in harmony and have integrated the different cycles of nature are the ones who are able to start bringing in their own life, day-to-day life activities, and then sharing with groups how we balance this relationship of life and death, of giving and taking. You know, we take a lot. From the day that we're born, we begin taking from our first breath, from the first food that we consume. Are we in balance with giving in the same way back to the elements that have given us this planet, back to Gaia or Mother Earth or Panchamama, whatever you choose to call her, who gave us life, who gives us this physical body. On some level, when we give an offering, we're giving a part of ourselves too. So we could even think of that as a form of death. We are taking some part of us and giving it over into the life cycle. So we begin to heal and transcend from a space of seeing ourselves as this individual and merging more into understanding nature and life as a holistic, whole, ever-flowing essence and presence of creation that is continually in motion. And that motion is the yin and the yang. It is the form and the non-form. It is life and it is death. And so I leave you with that as a thought to cycle through your system with each breath, with each inhale, life, and with each exhale, death. We came in with an inhale, and one day we will leave with our last exhale. As I end this live. So much blessings to you all. May you be feeling fulfilled as you watch this, and may your life truly be blessed, and may you bless all of those around you in life and in death.